Hello and welcome to the Flourishing Introvert Talks with me, Jo Rawbone. This is the podcast that celebrates the natural gifts of introverts so that we can flourish in all situations. Episode 183, Flourishing Personified. And this week, my guest, I'm delighted to say, is Professor Heidi K. Brown. Heidi is Associate Dean for Upper Level Writing at New York Law School, and she's the author of a number of books, including, and wait for this, The Introverted Lawyer, Untangling the Fear of Lawyering, and The Flourishing Lawyer. So you can see why we connected, first of all on LinkedIn, and then decided to record this episode, because Flourishing Introverts brings together two of the things that Heidi is clearly passionate about when it comes to lawyering. She's a graduate of the University of Virginia School of Law, Associate Dean for Upper Level Writing at New York Law School, and a former litigator in the construction industry. Heidi earned a master's degree in applied positive psychology from the University of Pennsylvania, and she is the 2023 award recipient for outstanding contributions to well-being in legal education from the Association of American Law Schools section on balance and well-being in legal education. So after that introduction, there's nothing left for me to say except welcome, Heidi. Please say hi, tell us a little bit about yourself to flesh out what I've already mentioned, and then we'll, I think, just shoot the breeze a bit.
That sounds great. Thank you so much for having me. I was so excited to talk to you, especially because you're called the Flourishing Introvert. And I've actually written a book called The Introverted Lawyer and another one called The Flourishing Lawyer. So I felt like we needed to chat. But yes, I'm a sort of a recovering lawyer. I was a lawyer for a long time in the construction industry, but 14 years ago, I became a law professor and I teach legal writing, and I love to write, and I write books about well-being topics for introverts, but also people who have performance anxiety in the legal profession.
Brilliant. And what led you to focus on the performance anxiety piece? Because for me, looking at, as an external as I do, looking at lawyers, probably the last thing I would imagine them to have would be performance anxiety. So what led you in that direction?
Right. That's kind of the myth that we are taught, basically, because what we see on television or in movies, the quote unquote good lawyer or the successful lawyer is always the one who sounds more extroverted, can argue at the drop of a hat, but that's actually not the reality. When I was coming through law school and starting my first job, I was only 24. I was 21 when I went to law school and 24 when I started practicing, and I loved the research and writing aspects of my job, but I didn't love arguing, which seems like, okay, why did I go to law school? But I felt like there's a place for me in law school because I really like solving problems, and I love writing, as I mentioned. I love researching. I love figuring out puzzles. And I thought the performance stuff would just come to me, and everyone kept telling me, fake it till you make it, or just practice and you'll be fine. And none of those kind of catchy slogans ever worked for me. I needed to actually embrace the fact, first of all, discover that I was an introvert. I didn't know what that really meant back then. And then discover and be proud of the assets that quiet people bring to the profession, but then figure out how to amplify my natural voice authentically, not fake it till I make it. That just does not work for me. So that's what got me into studying the performance anxiety aspects. And to be honest with you, there are a lot of people in the legal profession that grapple with that, but we've been told to fake it, which I just think is unhealthy.
Yeah, me too. And regular listeners to the podcast will know that it's one of my most hated, if I can say that, phrases. And yet I'm quite comfortable with acting as if, because for me, there's a subtle difference there. Some people may say it's semantics, but for me, as soon as I think about faking it, it's like my whole physiology knows that what I'm doing is faking. Whereas if I model what somebody else is doing, so if I notice how confident people walk in or how they conduct themselves when they're arguing, it's like, okay, well, I could try to be like that. So for me, and I'd be interested to know if that works for you, whether the acting as if is okay, where faking it till you make it isn't.
I completely agree with you. And I feel like we don't like faking it because introverts resist inauthenticity. We like authenticity. And that's why we're good one-on-one, not making small talk necessarily at networking and things like that, but really going deep with one person because we don't like inauthenticity.
Yeah.
But to the point, I do like to act as if, and I have this journal that I do every morning, and it's a gratitude journal that one of my students designed. It's called Tons of Gratitude. And she prompts the writer to write 2 things you love about yourself, things that you're grateful for today, but then things you're grateful for that haven't happened yet. And to me, that's like acting as if I write down all these things that I know are going to happen in the future because I'm working hard and I'm creating space for those things to happen. But to me, that's like you're saying, act as if I'm acting grateful that those things have already happened.
Mm-hmm.
It's so cool to see patterns in my morning journaling to tell me, oh, this is something that I want to achieve. And it's not happening right now, but it's totally going to happen. And I'm grateful for it. And I'm going to make it happen.
Absolutely. I trained as a trainer with Mike Dooley, he of Notes from the Universe and Tut. And one of the exercises that we did when we were training, that we therefore do with the students, is a whole process where we talk about things that we really desire in the future as though they've happened in the current moment. So we talk about them in the present tense. And it's really powerful. And I remember being taught at that point that the subconscious mind doesn't know the difference between real and imagined. So when you talk about it in the present moment, in the present tense, it's like it has happened. And it's like our whole physiology aligns to say, okay, well, if that's the way it's going to happen, that's the way it's going to happen, which is why the thoughts become things is such a powerful way of approaching that. So you mentioned a little earlier that, you know, it took you a while to figure out that you were an introvert. When did you find out and how? I'm intrigued to know.
I knew all along that I was a quiet person, but the labels that were sort of heaped upon me were very confusing. I mean, people would say introversion, but they would lump it together with shyness or social anxiety or aloofness or I'm kind of a loner. And I felt like none of those, I mean, some of those resonated with me, but it was always made to seem like it was a negative. And so what really got me into doing a deep dive into all this was when I became a law professor. I noticed, so I grade anonymously to preserve fairness for my students, but every time I would reveal the grades in that first year of teaching, I was kind of excited that my top students, my top legal writing students, were the quietest students in class. And then they would come and talk to me about their writing, and they would confide in me that they were also the students who were the most afraid to be cold called in law school in America. You know, professors just call on you at random and you don't know what's coming. It can be very intimidating. And so the same students, my top legal writing students, were my introverts. And also in a, you know, obviously a different category, but some of them grappled with shyness and social anxiety like I did. So I started doing a deep dive into the research into introversion. I discovered Susan Cain's book, Quiet, which kind of changed my life.
Yeah,
And
it's our Bible in a way, isn't it? So
yes, she was the first one to really make me realize, oh, wait, introversion is pretty awesome. And we're told in the legal profession a lot that it's not awesome. So I read Susan Cain's book and then like 26 other books about introversion as a superpower, but also distinguishing introversion from shyness and social anxiety, because I have all of those things. And that enabled me, that's what got me writing my own book, The Introverted Lawyer. And first of all, highlighting the strengths that we bring to the table as introverts, but also because we don't have the luxury of just being quiet all the time, how we can amplify our voices, but authentically. And that really led me into, as you mentioned, the physiology. I started studying my body and how I react in stressful situations or in meetings. Not only as an introvert, I'm always the last person to speak in a meeting because I'm listening.
Yeah.
But when I'm on call or I'm the center of attention, I have a really robust blushing response. So my physiological reaction or biological reaction to being the center of attention is really visible on my face. And I can't control that no matter how calm I feel. So I've had to teach myself, the research calls it somatic intelligence, to understand how my brain interacts with my emotions and my cognition. And that's just been life-changing for me. I love it.
Yeah. And there are so many things that I could pick up on what you said, and I'm going to try and follow most of those threads if I possibly can, because you're such a powerful example of how an introvert, but also an introvert with social anxiety, and an introvert who identified with shyness, with this robust kind of flushing response, is such a success at what they do. So what were some of the ways, do you think, that you mastered that, so that you haven't hidden inside your introversion, you haven't used it as an excuse, which I think both of us know we see people do that day in, day out? So how are some of the ways that you've really emerged from that but retained your authenticity?
I love this question. This gets me excited to talk about this. So kind of four things I think come to mind, and we don't have to go through all of them. But the first one is finally giving myself permission to reject all those messages like fake it till you make it. And my mom is a really gregarious extrovert, and she likes to. I grew up in a religious household. My dad was a minister, so we were always kind of on stage as the minister's family. And my mom didn't really understand why that didn't work for me, and so I had to finally say no, I'm not going to fake it till I make it. But I also needed, so step two is getting to know myself. So rejecting those messages or giving myself permission to reject the messages. Second, really getting to know myself. I love this tool called the VIA Institute on Character survey on character strengths. And it's this 15-minute free anonymous survey, but you get a list of your 24 character strengths, and you get to know your top 5. And I was so excited when I saw what my top 5 were, because even as a quiet person, my top 5 are perseverance, zest, curiosity, creativity, and love of learning. That's all amazing stuff. So I started just getting excited about who I was, who I am. And then the third step, I put myself in boxing lessons because I needed something that was, first of all, a little bit scary, intimidating, but that I could learn and do. So I started training one-on-one with a real boxing trainer and asked him to treat me like a real fighter. And I started to discover my body. And, obviously when I'm boxing, my face is fire engine red, but but I learned to trust the rise and fall of the anxiety symptoms or of the stress symptoms, because I was doing this hardcore physical activity. That's enabled me to be able to recalibrate when I feel those symptoms coming on, or those natural biological responses coming on when I get up on stage, which I do a lot now, which I think is hilarious, that the person with extreme public speaking anxiety is like this international public speaker. And then number 4, I kind of overshare all the time. And I feel like that's changed my whole life, though. The fact that I will so openly say now to my students or to my colleagues or to anybody out there, I'm an introvert, and it's pretty incredible to be an introvert. And I'm not going to pretend I'm not. So if I need a minute to think about my answer to your question, you're going to have to wait a minute. And if I'm turning red, I just have to let that go. And I read this great book by a woman named Erica Hilliard about living, I think it's called Living with Shyness, Living Fully. I'm totally messing up the name of her awesome book. But in the middle of the book, she says that blushing is life coursing through you. So now when I blush, I think in my head, oh, yay me, I'm alive. And then I put it out of my mind. Whereas before I started this whole process, I would dwell on it forever and it would get worse. So those are kind of my 4 things.
They're amazing. And what the audience couldn't see or hear me doing was applauding as you were talking about being very open about the fact that you identify as an introvert and that there's nothing wrong with that. And I love the fact when you took my quiz, you came out as an open and sociable introvert, because it kind of ties that in beautifully, actually.
I thought that was really interesting. I love your quiz because I've never done that sort of deep dive into my introversion. So I find your quiz incredibly helpful. And I was laughing when I saw that I was sociable and open, because I am the first one to stay home on a Friday night and pretend to all my friends that I'm doing something fabulous.
Yeah.
I am doing something fabulous. I'm with myself. But I have, because of all this work I've been doing on myself, I think I'm able now to be very sociable, and I like the openness part of that assessment on your quiz, because like I said, like, I'm an open book. I will probably overshare because I'm excited about all these revelations that I feel like everybody should be excited about who they really are inside, not what society or our profession is telling us to be.
Again, I absolutely agree with that. And I identify as an open introvert as well on my quiz. So I too am likely to overshare. And I'm so passionate about us being able to be very open about the fact that we do identify as introverts. There's nothing wrong with that, because I think it's a bit like that Marianne Williamson quote, in terms of when we shine, we kind of enable others to do the same thing. I can't quite remember the exact words, but I think the more of us who are prepared to say I'm an introvert, it kind of has people go, well, so am I. I didn't know it was okay to talk about that. So yeah, I absolutely applaud you for doing that completely. I was also identifying my results from my VIA, and I share some of yours as well in terms of love of learning. I was just looking through, I might come back to those at the end, because, for me, the more we know and understand about ourselves, the more chance we stand of living a fulfilled life. And isn't that what life is all really about, I think?
I completely agree. And that's why I do love the VIA, the Values in Action Inventory on our strengths, because it gives us a shared vocabulary around our strengths. And I think it's Dr. Ryan Nemec, who's sort of the guru of character strengths, says there's a thing we can do called strength spotting, where when we can share, like, now I know what some of your signature strengths are. When I see you out there in the world doing them, I can say, hey, I spotted you doing your strength of love of learning, or your strength of curiosity, or your strength of zest. And it's I think in positive psychology they call that the upward spiral. And as you mentioned, it kind of has like ripple effects. We can lift each other up by honoring each other's strengths and not focusing on weaknesses that really aren't weaknesses anyway.
Absolutely. And again, my audience will have heard me talking several times about the fact that, yes, there are weaknesses that sometimes we need to work on, but there are also allowable weaknesses that I can just let go of. I don't need to develop those at all. But why not focus on turning a strength into a superpower? And I'm all for that. I have to say, all for that.
I agree with you on the weakness side. That's why I like the VIA, because they, in the list of 24, our lowest strengths, they actually don't call them weaknesses. They just call them our lower strengths, and say that, the 3 E's apply to our top. They energize, excite, and come easily for us. The lowest ones just don't energize, excite, or come easily for us. We can totally work on them, as you mentioned. But what I like is that, again, that self-knowledge. I was laughing when I realized that well, first of all, I was horrified, because the past 7 years I've been leading a team for a living, and my bottom 2 strengths on the VIA are leadership and teamwork, which I think is hilarious. But it doesn't mean that I'm necessarily terrible at that. It just means that those skills don't energize, excite, or come easily for me. So I can, with that knowledge, I can work on creating my schedule around the days that I have to lead a team.
Yeah.
I can put boundaries around myself and set up my schedule better, so I don't drain my energy. And I can ramp up the excitement and make it come more easily for me. But that, like you said, I mean, those are things that we have to be conscious of to be able to work on, and not just shrug them off. Some things we can shrug off for sure, like you said, but It's all about the knowledge, is what I'm saying.
It is. And all of that enables me, as you so beautifully put, to pre-charge in advance of some of those things that I know are going to be more challenging, like the leadership, and also build in time for recharge, because I work with too many organizations where we're back to back meetings. And when do people get time to do the work that is often kind of generated from the meeting? But also, when do they get time to recharge, to look after their own well-being, which is why it's so amazing that the work you're doing and that you've been recognized for in terms of the well-being amongst the lawyers, I think is absolutely fantastic.
Thank you.
Now, clearly you do love writing. I mean, yeah, you do. And you love teaching it as well and kind of helping others with their writing. So what are you working on next, dare I ask, Heidi?
Oh, I'm so excited that you asked this question, because my new passion project is a travel memoir. Because one of my I have 4 well-being pillars: writing, boxing, solo travel, and the band U2. I love the Irish band U2. They're just my favorite, which I know some people might roll their eyes, but I love them. But solo travel is, as an introvert, I love to travel alone, and it's just an adventure for me. So I've written a manuscript of my very first travel memoir, and so I'm sort of in the process of editing that and finding. I need a literary agent for that particular project that I didn't need for my prior books. So I'm kind of learning about that process, and I keep making a list of other places I want to go and write about, because I feel like writing travel memoirs and travel type narratives, I talk a lot about psychology and my own growth through like relationship recovery issues, some, trauma issues, all that through the lens of travel, because I feel like travel, especially as an introvert, it gives you a perspective on your own life, but also the world that you don't necessarily get if you're with a big group of people. So I think it's kind of a neat combination of the introversion and self-discovery, self-reflection, all while I'm running around the world doing fun things.
Amazing. And if I could be really cheeky and ask you to share maybe one of those little snippets about travel and what you've learned about yourself and what you can then apply from that, I'd love a little insight from that.
Yeah, I think what's been the pattern that I've seen arise. So this book that I've written so far, it has 12 or 13 chapters, and each is a different place that I went. And what I realized is that in each adventure, I did something really scary. And I didn't plan it this way when I was writing it, but I encountered a fear of mine. I had to confront a fear of mine. And like, for instance, I mean, this is going to sound really glamorous, but the first chapter, I go to Rome for the first time, and I met this guy, and I rode on the back of his motorcycle, and I was scared. But that's kind of the more glamorous one. But I did a really interesting sweat lodge experience in Mexico, and I was in there with a whole bunch of people. It was hot. I couldn't really breathe. That made me nervous. I went to Australia, and I'm really scared of the ocean, and I snorkeled in the Great Barrier Reef, and I saw a shark. So things like I climbed a mountain in Peru that during kind of a really rainy, slippery day, and there's no guardrails or anything. So those experiences, while they're not the riskiest things in the world, for me, they made me confront things in my childhood that made me kind of fear the world, and I had to figure them out during these trips. But I also realized how willing other people were to help me. So in each of those situations, there was somebody who I didn't know that well who was there saying, you can totally do this because you're brave and courageous and you can do this.
Yeah.
Interestingly, the boxing kind of weaves its way through the book too, because like I explained, I've really learned through boxing how to breathe. And in my normal life, I hold my breath all the time. And the boxing, I have to breathe. And so what I realize in these trips when I'm scared or nervous or trying something new, I have to remind myself to breathe. And I also have to remind myself it's okay if stuff goes wrong. And because when you travel, stuff goes wrong and you just figure it out.
Yeah.
So I love it. I love it so much.
Again, a couple of things I want to pick up on, because August happens to be the month of bravery here at Flourishing Introverts, and I'm running 3 sessions called Becoming Braver, because so many introverts realize that they know what to do. It's just that they don't yet feel brave enough to do it. And I explored the whole topic a couple of episodes ago, where what I realized from my perspective, and this is only my working proposition, is that bravery is the precursor to confidence, in that I think we have to have a degree of bravery to take action that then builds the confidence by doing the things. So I love the fact that you talk about doing scary things. And the thing I really want to pick up on is the breathing. So do you have a particular breathing technique that enables you just to kind of to center again, to be grounded, to come back into the present moment, perhaps?
I wish I did. My problem is, and I work with my boxing trainer on this all the time, because he can tell that my breath gets stuck up here, and I'm pointing to the to my like neck area. I can't get the breath and air down into my belly. I don't know. I feel like there's something blocking me, and so he works with me a lot to try to just draw that breath deep inside me and let it sit. And so I've tried box breathing. I've tried, counting my breaths, and I've read 2 amazing books about breathing to try to work on that, but I know that it gets stuck. And I've read, Vander Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score, and I feel like there's something in there that I haven't figured out yet about why my breath gets stuck too high up in my body. It doesn't go in where it needs to go. So I really work on that, and it's a lifelong challenge for me, because as soon as I either over breathe or I don't breathe at all, and really try to work on that a lot and model that when I'm feeling nervous, before a big speech or a performance or something, or I'm teaching, I'll realize, oh, I haven't taken a breath. I just need to stop. So I guess to answer your question, my technique that I do is, when I realize that somatic awareness, I have to completely recalibrate my body, and I like to stand or sit like an athlete would, or like a performer would, and just a completely balanced seated stance. Or if I'm standing, I'll do a power pose or like a starfish pose. And that reminds me, okay, now it's time to breathe again. Try to breathe again.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's something that a lot of people will identify with, because as stress starts to build, for most of us, it impacts our breathing in one way or another. So I think a lot of people will relate to that. And if you ever get to the bottom of why your breath stays stuck here, I would love to explore that with you again and understand that, because again, back to the more we understand ourselves, in a way, the better a life we can lead and the more fulfilled we're likely to be. So I'd love to explore that at a later point, perhaps. Yeah,
definitely. That gives me something to explore in my writing too. I will go back and look when I was snorkeling in the barrier reef. You have to breathe. Your face is in this mask. And I remember I was wearing, this was the scariest part of that little adventure. They said, here, you have to put on this stinger suit, which is a full body suit to protect you from the Irukandji jellyfish season. So I'm like, wait a minute, I'm in this stinger suit, but I've got this snorkel mask that is not covering my entire face. And you want me to get into that water where there's sharks? And somehow I did that. And I remember hearing my breath going through the snorkel mask out the little snorkel thingy. And it calmed me down, because I could hear my own breathing, which was very strange. But I like that you've kind of prompted me to think about that more, why it gets stuck, because I think that would be a good writing project for me too.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's prompted me to think about whether you've ever explored it through the lens of bioenergetics, in terms of where our energy gets stuck, because I know there is a particular energy block up here too.
I feel like with the chakras, that's my voice, and that would fit well with the public speaking anxiety that I wrestled with my whole life. I feel like I feel like I've worked through that intellectually, but clearly if it's getting stuck there, there's more work to do. But I will investigate that. Thank you so much. And then I will report back to you.
Yeah, it's just something I remember being completely fascinated about. I came across bioenergetics for the first time at the same time I found out I was an introvert. I was on a Women into Leadership course that was run by Cranfield, which is a prestigious kind of management college here in the UK. And I found out I was an introvert by taking the Myers-Briggs type indicator there, which I know a lot of people poo-poo, but for many introverts, it's like that first moment we read that little paragraph and we see ourselves reflected back is like a revelation. And the other thing was where we looked at the patterns of where energy is blocked in our bodies, and it so ties in with the somatic work you do that I think it would be completely fascinating.
Thank you. I'm excited to investigate that. I just wrote that down.
Brilliant. So we're coming close to winding up, although I think we could carry on talking for a very long time. I would love for you to share with the audience one piece of advice for introverts so that they too can flourish. And because we're both fans of positive psychology, we know that flourishing is not a destination, it's the journey. But what would one piece of advice be that you would give to introverts so that they really can flourish?
Yes, I love the definition of flourishing is sort of that eudaimonic well-being, the EU being in eudaimonic being the Greek for good. And that's setting up systems so we function well. We don't just feel good, but we function well.
Yeah.
So I think for me, what I would recommend is really give yourself permission to do that self-discovery. Take the values and action inventory on your character strengths or other things like the 16 personalities. Take your assessment to know more what kind of introvert you are. And then I would say also begin to treat yourself like an athlete or like a performer if the athlete model doesn't work for you, because athletes and performers don't just focus on the one skill that brings them glory on the field or on the stage. They set up systems where their work is working on multiple dimensions. And for me, because the breath does get caught and, I still stumble with all this stuff. I have to set up daily routines and rituals where I know that if I get up every morning and I do that 3-part gratitude journal and I'm a big fan of Julia Cameron's book, The Artist's Way. So I do my 3 pages of morning pages, and then I fit my exercise in at some point, whether it's boxing or running. That's part of my daily ritual. And then once I've done that, it sets me up as an introvert to be able to say out loud to people that are trying to derail me, hey, no, this is not part of my process. If you want to get the top-notch work out of me, this is my process. And I've studied it and it works. So I know that was kind of a mixed bag of advice, but get to know yourself, do these amazing self-assessments, and then treat yourself like an athlete or a performer and set up rituals and routines that will help you thrive and flourish every single day. And if you're not sure how to do that, seek out people like you, Joanna, to help.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And I'll make sure that there's a link to the VIA character questionnaire in the show notes so that people can do that. And maybe we can have a whole show about that where we can talk about, how we see that. I'm also, as I'm kind of listening to you, thinking about another professional I've just met called Karen Taylor, who is fascinating me with her work she's doing around our multiple brains. And we typically know about, a brain, the physical brain in our head, and about our heart brain and about our gut brain. But she started talking about our pelvic brain and other brains. And it's like, whoa, this has just opened me up for a whole new conversation now.
That is exciting. I'm excited to dig into that research too. Fantastic.
Yeah, I'll make sure that I connect you, and I'm having Karen Taylor on as a guest fairly soon. So let's see where that conversation goes, because I think that'll be fascinating. So thank you so much, Heidi. This has been absolutely fascinating, and it's always such a joy to have people guest on the podcast who are as open as you are about the fact they identify as an introvert and they still have stuff that they're working on, and they're incredibly successful in their careers. So I want to thank you for being so open with us on our conversations today. Is there anything that you'd like to leave us with just before we close?
I just am so thankful and grateful to you for giving me the opportunity to talk to you about all these things that I'm incredibly passionate about. And if people out there are wondering if they can be a flourishing, successful, happy, vibrant introvert, yes, you can.
Perfect.
If you need a pep talk, I'm here. So I'm happy to help.
And if people want to find out more about you and your work, do you have a website that you can point people to?
Yes, all of my work is compiled on a website called theflourishinglawyer.org, and it contains links to everything I've written, really my 3 books on well-being for law students and lawyers, which really can apply to any profession, but I sort of do it through the lens of lawyering. And then some articles, but I've also gathered some other well-being resources that many other experts have written, and they're all compiled on my website. So theflourishinglawyer.org.
Oh, that's perfect. And as I said right at the start, it makes perfect sense that we connected the flourishing introvert and the flourishing lawyer and the flourish and the introverted lawyer. It makes perfect sense that we're all here talking about that. So Heidi, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, then please subscribe, rate us and leave a comment, because we know that helps other people find the podcast. And if other people find us, other introverts can flourish.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.